All right, let's dig into one of the biggest ideas in global economics. It's a theory that feels so intuitive, so much like common sense, you'd think it explains everything about who sells what to whom. But as we're about to see, the real world had a few major plot twists in store. So let's jump right in with a question that seems pretty simple on the surface. Why is it that a country like the United States exports things like massive airplanes, while a country like Vietnam exports things like sneakers? The answer feels obvious, right? But the theory behind that obvious answer has some incredibly powerful and pretty controversial consequences. Okay, so the classic answer to that question is something called the Heckscher-Ohlin model. Now, that sounds super academic, but the idea itself is incredibly simple. It basically says that countries export stuff that uses a whole lot of whatever they have a whole lot of. Put it this way, you sell to the world what you're already set up to make easily. Let's break that down. Imagine you have two countries. Country A is labor-rich. It's got tons and tons of workers, but maybe not so many fancy factories. The theory says it's going to export things that require a lot of hands, like clothes or toys. Then you have country B. It's capital-rich, loaded with advanced technology, robots, and machinery. It's going to be the one exporting things like airplanes and software. It's all about playing to your strengths. So that's the whole idea in a nutshell. It's about efficiency. You do what you're built to do. A country with endless forests sells timber. A country with tons of capital sells high-tech gadgets. It just makes sense. But, and this is a huge but, this simple idea leads to a much more complicated reality when we start asking who actually gets rich from all this. Because this is where the theory gets really interesting and really controversial. It doesn't just predict what's in the shipping containers. It tries to predict what happens to your paycheck. And, well, it turns out it's not good news for everybody. Okay, so follow the logic here. When a capital-rich country starts selling its airplanes to the rest of the world, it's not just selling to its own citizens anymore. Suddenly, you've got this massive global demand. And what happens when demand goes way up? The price goes up with it.
So if airplanes are suddenly more valuable, who gets the money? Well, the people and the resources that go into making them. Demand for the skilled engineers, for the advanced machinery, for the capital investment needed to build a plane, it all skyrockets. And so do their incomes.
And this brings us to a really stark and powerful conclusion, known as the Stolper-Samuelson theorem. What it says is that trade creates clear winners and clear losers. The owners of the stuff a country has in abundance, they win. But the owners of the stuff that's scarce in that country, they lose. Let's make that real. For a country like the US, which has a lot of capital and a lot of high-skilled labor, the theory predicts that global trade will boost the wages of college-educated, skilled workers. But for low-skilled workers, the scarce factor, they're now competing with a flood of imports, and their wages are likely to fall, or at the very least, stagnate. And this isn't just a short-term thing. The model says this is a permanent, long-run change. So it's a really neat theory, right? It has these powerful, politically explosive predictions. It seems to explain so much about the world. There was just one little problem. When economists actually went and looked at the data, the real world didn't seem to be following the script. I mean, the test seemed like a slam dunk. Back in the middle of the 20th century, the United States was, without any doubt, the most capital-rich country on the planet. So, according to the Heckscher-Ohlin model, its exports should have been way more packed with capital and technology than the stuff it was importing. Simple enough, right? But then an economist named Leontief actually ran the numbers, and he found the complete opposite. It was wild. This data from '62 shows it perfectly. U.S. imports were actually more capital-intensive than U.S. exports. America was exporting things that were relatively heavy on labor, basically turning the entire theory on its head. And this became famously known as the Leontief paradox. It was a massive puzzle for economists. The most elegant, common-sense theory of global trade had just spectacularly failed its first big test in the world's biggest economy. What was going on here? And the weirdness didn't stop there. The model also predicted a truly gigantic volume of trade between countries. But when you look at the actual numbers, it's just a fraction of that. This was called the missing trade puzzle, and it pointed to a really big flaw in the original theory. It just assumed all countries used the same technology, which obviously is not true at all. So these paradoxes really forced economists to go back to the drawing board, and it led them straight into one of the biggest economic debates of our lifetime. As we've seen income inequality grow in wealthy countries, what's the real culprit? Is it global trade, like the original model suggested? Or
Is it something else?
Essentially, we have two main suspects. The trade explanation says, look, we're competing with low-wage countries, and that's what's pushing down wages for our low-skilled workers. But the technology explanation points a finger in a different direction. It argues the real villain here is automation, computers, and robots, things that make skilled workers more valuable and make low-skilled workers replaceable.
So which one is it? Well, there's a lot of evidence that makes the simple blame trade story look a little shaky. For one, the prices of goods made by low-skilled workers didn't fall the way the theory said they should. Plus, and this is a real head-scratcher for the theory, wages for skilled workers also went up in developing countries like Mexico. That's the exact opposite of what the model predicts. And because of evidence like this, the consensus view among most economists today is that the main driver of rising inequality has been what they call skill-biased technological change. It sounds complicated, but it just means that technology, like computers and software, is biased in favor of workers who have the skills to use it. That story just seems to fit the facts a whole lot better. So, where are we? We started with this beautiful, simple theory. It crashed into a confusing paradox, and now we've landed in the middle of a really complex debate about our modern economy. Let's try to pull all these threads together. So here's the arc of our story. We started with the simple theory: you export what you've got. That led to the very stark consequence: you get clear winners and losers. But then came the paradox, where the real world just refused to play along. And finally, we get to a resolution. Technology, maybe even more than trade, is the bigger force reshaping our economies. But, and this is really important, this doesn't mean trade is off the hook. The truth is, these two things are tangled together. The intense pressure of global competition can actually speed up technological change. Think about it. If your company is suddenly competing with firms all over the world, you have a massive incentive to automate, to upgrade your software, to do anything you can to get more efficient. And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to chew on. For decades, our public debate has been absolutely obsessed with trade deals and competition from other countries. But if the evidence keeps pointing to technology as the bigger, more relentless driver of change, are we focusing all of our energy and maybe all of our anger on the wrong problem?